Welcome. This is the Board of Selectmen's meeting for September 19, 2017. And we want to remind everybody that we're being video recorded. We also take a moment at the beginning of every meeting to appreciate our troops who are serving around the world. Thank you. Let's see, announcements. State primary election today for another hour. Polls open until 8 p.m. State election will take place on Tuesday, October 17, 2017. That's to fill the Senate seat, state Senate seat. Representative Sean Dooley will hold office hours at the Town Hall on Thursday, October 5, from 11:30 to 12:30. And our first appointment is with Robert Borelli, who's discussing a proposed plan for 71 North Street. Thanks for coming.
Hi, I'm Jim Murphy. I'm on the team with Bob Borelli and also Rob Truex from GLM Engineering and Ed Lyons.
Jim, can you just, if you can use a microphone, then the people that watch on TV at home can hear you. Thank you.
As I said, Jim Murphy, I'm the attorney for Bob Borelli, and with him is Rob Truex from GLM Engineering, and Ed Lyons is the architect. And what we're here tonight to talk to you about is 71 North Street. And we're seeking again to see whether or not we can get the selectmen to join with us in putting forth a LIP for 71 North Street. It's right next to 67 North Street, and just to remind you what happened there, we came before the selectmen. We sought to get a LIP endorsement from the selectmen. We did that. That project is just about finished. I think we're going to be able to offer it for rental beginning as early as November of this year. 71 North, like 67 North, is proposed to be 8 units. 2 would be affordable, and they would be all rental, which I think is a benefit to the town because then you get to count all 8 for your affordable housing. So I know we have a very short window of time for you and for the appointment. So I'm just going to turn it right over to Rob to go through some of the details of the plan. But as I said, I think you're probably pretty familiar with 71 North. It's an 1800 structure, which will have to be some, like 67 North, we'll have to do obviously some renovations and some other work to it. But otherwise, it's a residential program. We will be using some parking that's going to be on that site, but that's only going to be about 3 parking spaces right on the site. The rest of the parking is going to come from the Montrose shared parking lot that we have the cross easements for. And again, I think this is going to work well for the town. So I'm going to just turn it over to Rob and Ed to talk about some of the details of that.
For the record, I'm Rob Truex of GLM Engineering Consultants. We're the site engineers, surveyors for the project. So as Jim said, this site's located right next door to 67 North Street. Up on the board here, it's the colored-in green area, and there's the existing building is up in the front here, which is this portion, and a little bit which is in the parking. And then the add-on proposed addition would go out the back. If you went out to the site today, you'd be able to drive into the site and go around into the back area, which is all paved, and exit back out on North Street. What we're proposing is to have some parking in the front, which would be 3 spaces. One would be a handicap space. There'd be accessibility into the building with ramps going up into the front entry. And then what we would do is we're going to provide, there'd be an entrance in the back here of the building. We're going to provide a walkway that crosses over onto lot 70, onto existing house number 67, and gets these folks to the parking area on the Montrose property in the back where Bob has the easement. So we have a total of 44 spaces on the Montrose property, and we have 3 on this, which gives us a total of 47. The new structure would only need 12 spaces according to the regulations, 1.5 per unit, which is 8, so we'd need 12. The existing structure on 67 is 8 units as well, and that would need 12. So you can see we'd have only 24 needed. We have 47 total, so we have almost double what's required for the site. So that's just some parking. I mean, obviously the plan's not completed. We would go through site plan review, or actually through ZBA, And everyone would look at it from a drainage standpoint, runoff, et cetera, which we would incorporate into the plan as we get further along. But that's pretty much the overview, and that's the function of it. So there would be an access onto North Street for those 3 parking spaces, and that would be a 24-foot wide access road going out. And Ed Lyons is here as well. He's the architect, so if you have questions, he can show you floor plans, et cetera, if you want to see those as well.
Sure.
You want to take a look at them?
Yep, please.
I have extra sets of the floor plans for each of you if you want
Okay,
to
thank you.
take them with you. The character of the building is intended to be very similar to what we did next door, so the work is a little neighborhood. The existing building in the front will remain as is, with the exception of the one-story shed that we're removing. It's in pretty bad condition. We're going to do 2 units, 1 on each floor in the front, and then we're adding 2 units for 3 floors in the back for a total of 8. If you were looking from the street, this view would be pretty similar to what you see now, except obviously we'd be redoing the siding and the windows and bringing everything up to code. From the side, this much is the existing building with the existing porch, which will be rebuilt. And this is the addition in the back, and because the grade changes, we were able to drop that down so we can keep the overall height as close to the original as we possibly could. Materials and appearance, again, very similar to what you're seeing across the street now.
It looks like there's 3 accessible units?
There's 2 accessible units.
2.
It's these units.
Okay. I'm just seeing 1 on the first floor, 1 on the second floor, 1 on the third floor.
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah, yes, correct. We don't need all 3 to be accessible. We designed them universal, so we can
Right.
make them accessible if we need
Because
them.
you got the elevator in there.
We have the elevator and we have the ramps.
And how is it going with the existing building? Has there been any marketing done yet, or is that gonna start soon, or?
So there's really 2 different components. I'll try to keep my voice up. For the market units, we can just market them ourselves. For the 2 affordable units, we have to go through an approved DCHD plan. They have the plan. DCHD hasn't given us the final approval yet. Then we have to go through a lottery process, which I think you're familiar with. There is, again, a preference for Medfield. There's a particular unit that I think the zoning board identified as being preferred out of the 2. That'll be for Medfield. So we are working with the firm that I think Medfield directed us to, and that's worked out well. I think it was an improvement. We had to replace them, but the first one, but the second one's been very efficient. So we'll go through that process. There'll be marketing materials. And then, hopefully it'll just go relatively smoothly. And we're gonna be, as I said, open as early as November 1st.
Well, I think the existing building looks great. I mean, it's a huge improvement, just from a visual standpoint on the street from what was there before. I mean, the other house is in rough shape. I mean, it really looks great. I think you did a really nice job with it. And I think.
Impressed how fast it went up. In the parking, so the parking approach you're taking with this building is the exact same parking approach you're taking with 67? They're already,
Yes, we already have a cross easement agreement with Montrose for
Yep.
the entire lot. And again, I think what happens is the type of uses that we have, they're kind of complementary. The time when they're going to be used mostly by the residents is at night, and the time when Montrose needs it for people to pass through is during the day. And right now, those properties, as well as 70 North across the street, they're working very well together. I think we've kind of, you're getting a very nice look now down, further down the street, before the buildings were not being as actively used. Now you're gonna go all the way out to the Bullers, in which you're going to have some nice economies, I think, for everyone.
I just had a technical question. I was just looking at the plans, and I didn't see where the elevator was.
There is no elevator.
Oh, there is no
I'm-
elevator.
Yes, you had asked me that earlier. No, there is no elevator requirement for this particular, the units on the first floor, which are accessible, I think there was a misnomer on the accessibility of the others. They will be universal. But on the first floor, you can get up the ramp and go into that unit. on
Oh,
the
okay,
first
so
floor.
that the other ones
Not an
really aren't
elevator
accessible then?
requirement. Sorry.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I misread this. This is the HVAC. I misread that as an elevator. That's what I was looking at, so.
How are you handling your drainage there?
There's actually less impervious.
Yeah, there will be less impervious than what's there today, but we can do some underground recharge for the roof runoff. That's what we did on the house next door. We did soil testing next door. It was all sand and gravel. We had good results, so.
Because I know, I think, I don't know, you're subject to the,
Board of Health.
yeah, but the federal stormwater regs, or are you under an acre, or what is it, an acre that?
Oh, you mean for, no, we would be
Stormwater
under an
retaining
acre.
it on the
Well,
side.
well under an acre.
Yeah,
Well, under
that's-
Quarter of an acre.
Yeah.
We would be under the federal permit requirement for land disturbance.
And I noticed you, it looks like you've seeded this last week.
That's seeded and planted the trees.
Oh, the trees are in, yeah, I haven't been up there since the trees went in, yeah.
Should be far enough along if the board wants to take a walk through the end of the month. All the kitchens will be in. And most of the flooring.
So what we're hoping to do is that if in fact we get an okay or go-ahead from the selectmen, then we'll go begin the more formal process with the ZBA, and as you know, with that process, we have to give them a much greater submission than what we've described here. We also have to give them a list of waivers. They have, typically then have a consultant, they have a draft decision. We worked very well with them before. I think Sarah and the consultant that they used really were helpful to us and to the board, and it was a very, I think, very smooth process. DCHD does actually come out to the site to make sure it's okay, and they give a blessing to it. They go over the financials, a pretty extensive application process with them to get the approvals, and then we have a whole bunch of oversight that we have to do. I think it's gonna be a little bit of a learning curve for us, but I think it's still gonna be very beneficial to the town. So really what we're really looking for tonight is to see whether or not we can get some affirmative indication from the board to proceed.
So one quick question. You just said this is a learning curve. How is this different than what you did for 67 North Street?
The learning curve is we have to go through an auditing process with the state. And I think that's the process that's going to be a learning curve for us, because, you know, typically we have completely for-profit plans.
Oh,
So we have to do a little bit more monitoring, and that information then gets shared with the town and go through all those things. So that's the part on the learning curve. The construction part, I think Bob really has that covered. I think he really is able to really see something and then really expand on it and still preserve the kind of the historic face to the street that I think the town and the people really appreciate. Since this is an 1800 building, we'd still have to go and see historic again, but I think with 67, they were much encouraged to do it more as housing than they were with the retail. And, you know, I think our experience has been that there's been a greater demand on the housing side than the small retail that otherwise would have to be there on the first floor.
Are you handling the marketing, the market units yourself, the rentals, or are you gonna contract that out?
On
Those are Mary Ellen Hoey for Berkshire Hathaway is handling that.
Okay.
that's on 67, correct, right.
Well, I think this is a terrific proposal. I'm very supportive of it. And with respect to the monitoring with 67 and the rest, you know, just keep in touch with what the town can do to be helpful, either Sarah or the consultant that we have. Community Opportunities Group is very knowledgeable, so if you need some help with that as you go through the learning curve with all the state oversight, just, you know, let them know. And I'm sure they'd be happy to be of assistance. But I would make a motion that we support this project and direct the town administrator, assistant town administrator, to work with Mr. Borelli and his team to prepare a LIP application with DHCD.
second?
So let me just have a moment of discussion before we vote. I think this is a great idea for the town. I personally think that we need a little more retail in the downtown, but I think that this is a perfect solution in terms of these properties to create residential units in smaller units in the downtown. I think it works for people to be able to have these sort of 40Bs in a very small site. People can walk to the downtown. I think it's going to be very attractive to people. At least I hope you have no trouble renting them out. In terms of the profit, I know that the town gets the excess profit if there's excess profit under 40B, so hopefully it will work really well for you.
Rent them out.
So I'm certainly in favor, and I like the fact that you saved the older buildings, you know, what there was of them to save. So that at 67, it still looks like the Jacob Cushman house in front, sort of, or pretty much, I guess, so. And it certainly looks a lot better than what the Jacob Cushman house looked like a year ago, so. So I'm fully in favor of this too, so. So any further discussion, or?
I'm just
all-
thinking, I've got a learning curve to come up on the profit opportunities of town with 40B.
Don't hold your breath.
Yeah, I don't think that the towns ever get much of that profit. All those in favor?
Aye.
Yep.
Thank you very
Good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bob, what's your timetable on this one? When do you expect to have this one done?
As soon as, now we'll just keep pushing ahead, hopefully get started right in the spring. It should be
Hopefully,
completed by
same time next year, basically, yeah.
quicker.
But we will get the approval by May, right? That's the goal?
Yes, absolutely.
By May.
But not too much
April,
before
give us a
May.
little bit of room.
Work with the town administrator on the timing of.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen, very much. At 7:15 now, we have the warrant committee, school committee members to discuss the FY19 budget guidelines. And Mike is handing out his materials, and he'll give us some guidance then. So I think the idea behind this was that we just have a very early discussion about what the three boards have in mind in terms of the upcoming finances for the,
Are you sure you all didn't want to just sit in the kitchen for this meeting, or not far enough away for? There's plenty of room up front.
It's like church.
Yes, the church, everyone's in the back row, right?
we think of that as the Bill Massaro rule.
Okay, I put together a package. I know in past years, both the selectmen and the warrant committee have been anxious to get moving early on the process, so you don't end up in March rushing around trying to find out what the warrant articles say, and what the budgets are. So the selectmen asked me to put together a calendar, and I've given you copies of that. This is a draft, so if you have any suggestions, feel free to get them to us, and the selectmen can review them and incorporate them into it. We expect a lot of changes in this because some of the boards can't come at the time we schedule them for, so it's a work in progress. The other package is very preliminary information on, believe it or not, fiscal 19. We have yet to set the fiscal 17 tax rate. We are now in fiscal 18, and we're putting together budget estimates for fiscal 19. The selectmen asked me to put together a very preliminary list of warrant articles, so we'd have some idea of what is coming up. And the top sheet is that list. If you people have any ideas for further articles that should be in there, just let me know and we'll add them to the list. If there's anything on there that any of you don't want, let me know and we can take it off. The warrant doesn't close until much later, but this gives you a head start so that you can start thinking about what you want to do. And
What's the date for the deadline?
well, there's a couple of dates, because in the past, we've had a date for all the warrant articles, but we found that there are some articles that need town council review that should be submitted earlier so that he can get them, review them, the selectmen and you people can review them, make sure the wording is proper. If they have to go to the planning board or the Board of Appeals or anything like that for review. So I think we had one for, let's see. January 2nd, it was the, let me see now.
Well, I think we had said in terms of articles that people wanted to have, they had to have them in by December 1st. Wasn't that the deadline we had set with final submission by January?
Tentatively, yeah.
The final submission by January 15th or something like that. I think
Yes.
we had come up with that they had to get something in if they wanted it to be included
Yes.
by the 1st, and then that would be the period for town council review would be between December and January 15th. They have to be finalized by January 15th. But I think the idea was that the departments also have to come in with drafted articles. They have to
Right,
draft
yes.
their articles and have their articles
Articles,
as
yeah.
drafted by December 1st. The town council can review and they'll be finalized by January 15th. I think that's what, Pete and Gus, is that consistent with your recollection?
Say that again.
I think the deadlines that we had talked about, or the deadlines that I think we had voted to impose, was that people and boards, committees, departments, et cetera, who want to have a warrant article have to have the warrant article in and drafted by December 1st. Right? We were going to get away from the system before where Mike made everyone's life easy by putting together draft warrant articles of any potential warrant articles that he heard of over the course of the year, and then just see what happens. We're going to put a deadline of December 1st for everybody to get the articles in, with final wording done by January 15th. So that period from the 1st of December to January 15th would give Mark, Sorrell, and whoever else opportunity to review the language, make sure it comports with it, and then
So I
we'll
was
be
just
done.
working off of what Mike put in his annual calendar draft here, which was January 2nd for people to submit things, but
Well,
if you can-
traditionally, we've opened the warrant the first week in January and closed it the end of January or the first week in February. Because of the holidays, people don't really get too motivated until after New Year's. So, I don't know whether you wanna speed that process up or how you people feel about
I mean, I'm
that.
happy to draw the line anywhere that works best. It's just that we need to let everybody know where we draw it.
Yeah. And we need to remind them that, we will not be chasing them. They have to bring it to us this time, because in the past, we've bent over backwards to accommodate them and.
Yeah. And it's really, I mean, the selectmen don't get that as involved as the warrant committee, so it's really a warrant committee issue and a Mike Sullivan issue and a Mark Sorrell issue, I think, more than, so I think if you guys can, that would be my sense, if you guys can tell us what you need for dates, then we can
Yeah.
make them the dates.
Well, I know last year, the warrant committee was particularly concerned that in past years, they hadn't had enough time to review the budgets. And they spent all their time on the warrant articles and never got to the budgets. So we tried to reverse that, and we were very successful. They got through the budgets, but they didn't get to the warrant articles, because the warrant articles didn't come in until February or March, and some of
Right.
them were.
I mean, I would suggest, subject to what all you all think, I would say December 1st, because nothing's going to get done between December 1st and January 2nd anyway.
Anyway.
And that way, you'll put the onus, the departments have really 2.5 months to put together whatever warrant articles they want. And we've said this before, so I mean, it's not going to be news to them, but there's the firm deadline. Obviously, there's provisions in the town charter for getting articles in the warrant, and people want to follow those procedures. But I think, the one role the selectmen do have is that we are responsible for the warrant and the warrant report, and so we can determine what goes in it and what doesn't. And so if we're agreed that if it doesn't come in on the schedule, we're not going to put it in there of our own accord, then people would have to follow the process outlined in the town charter if they don't meet the deadline. So I think sort of as the gatekeepers of the warrant, we ought to make clear that we're not going to put something on there that comes in on February 20th. And then, and I don't blame the planning board. I mean, last year they had a lot going on, but you guys got all that planning board stuff dumped on you at the absolute statutory last minute under, those 9 articles or whatever that you had to review.
Our preference is the sooner the better, with a hard stop
with the, whatever provisions are provided for within our town charter. But a hard stop, January 2nd, I think that's a date we get in there.
December 2nd or January 2nd?
January 2nd.
I think
January
December,
2nd, the hard stop,
December
but
1st.
December 2nd, you guys need a month or so to,
You talking about warrant articles or you talking about budgets?
no, the warrant articles.
I think what we're saying is they need to be submitted in draft form by December 1st.
Right.
But they need to be in final form by January 1st.
I thought you had January 15th or something on that.
That's the way it's, what do they say? It's always been that way, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. But
What?
So
That's
the concern, the only concern I would have,
December 2nd is great, and whether it's January 2nd or January 9th or January 16th, beyond that, it's not,
so let me just react to how I would, thinking about being on a warrant committee, I would kind of want to know that the warrant article's there by December 2nd, so that I could at least, especially if it's a finance related, if it's a warrant article that has money associated with it, so that I know to put some sort of a tag on for the warrant committee planning that says, I'm going to put some placeholder value on this. My concern around finalizing the wording of articles is that there's some piece of that that's a legal piece. So to dump a deadline on Mark to get the legal side of the wording completely spiffed up between December 2nd and January 2nd versus giving them 2 weeks into January seems unnecessarily.
Yeah, that's not what I was talking about.
Okay, what were you thinking?
I was just saying that if there, whatever time Mark needs, Mark gets to do,
Okay.
right, until the actual closing of the warrant or when the thing's got to be published. But from the standpoint of the town, you know, you got to get the article, here's what I would say. You get the article in by December 1st, okay? If you change your mind about something in it, you have until January 2nd to change your mind, all right? But if it's not in there in some form by December 1st, it's not in there, meaning
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
whatever Mark needs to do with it, Mark will do, because once, the Mark piece of it doesn't necessarily affect the warrant committee's work, right? I mean, whatever's got to be, you know, I's dotted, all the rest of it that Mark has to do, you can still schedule it in, okay, this is one that's going to take a whole meeting, and I've got to get all these people in here for this meeting, I've got to schedule this, here's the amount of time we're going to have. Particularly this year, where we're going to potentially, hopefully, likely have the hospital special town meeting going on at the same time. It's a ton of work for the warrant committee, and the sooner we get the stuff in, ton of work for Mark, the better. So I would say, my view would be the deadline should be December 1st to have the articles in, and then final wording from the committee by, if they need to change it by January 2nd, but Mark does his review on Mark's schedule. We're not giving Mark a deadline.
Okay, so that January 2nd.
Mark gets his work done.
The January 2nd deadline we're talking about now is the deadline that the submitter of the article has to revise or refine the article, as opposed to the legal refinements that Mark's going to do, and it's going to take whatever it, okay.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, that-
maybe we better ask a quick question to the real expert on this, Evelyn. She does all the groundwork for it anyway, but now selectmen have to vote to open the warrant. And then they have to vote to set a date for closing the warrant. So are you saying vote to open the warrant as of December 1st?
No, we just won't consider any articles that aren't submitted by then.
By then,
So if somebody doesn't submit it by then, I mean, there's a procedure under the town charter to submit them without our approval, you know, without us voting on it, but they're gonna have to follow that procedure if they don't get. And then we'll vote to open the warrant. I mean, it's kind of symbolic anyway, because it gets opened and closed every meeting between January and April anyway. So, I mean, we'll vote to open it. I think it's gonna be open for 20 days,
I think something
something like that.
November 7th to open the warrant,
Oh, okay.
it's very early.
It's yeah, that's the first budget
Usually
hearing.
the middle of December that we open the warrant,
Yep.
close it February
Yeah.
1st or 2nd meeting.
I mean, I think whatever we're required to do, we're required to do. I'm just saying from a practical standpoint, if people don't get an article in by the December 1st, we're not gonna put it in the warrant, put it on the warrant.
Well, maybe getting this list out, sending it to the departments and saying, this is what we got for a list.
Right.
Give us what you intend to put on, and give it to us quickly, so at least that'll prod them to know that they gotta move faster.
What I like about that, aside from making it more sane for the warrant committee, is if people haven't got their act together by December 2nd about what they want for a warrant article, unless there's some extreme emergency reason for that. Take another year to figure it out, if it comes down to that. And that's kind of, we probably get more thoughtful articles, more proactively prepared that way.
Fewer placeholders.
Right. We've had a lot of placeholders over the years,
Yeah.
evolving from A to
Right.
B to C to D.
Right.
And this year, we had all the stormwater stuff and
Yeah.
all the zoning stuff. And there were placeholders until really March, I think, before they came in.
The
So,
downtown parking study.
yes,
There's several
yeah,
articles that.
yeah. I mean, there,
Slightly variations, some which
Yeah.
were withdrawn, so.
yeah. Well, we'll try to get the warning out early and say, these are the deadlines,
We appreciate that.
do or die, so. Now, there's always exceptions. I'm thinking, for example, the library director is resigning. They might have a new library director. You might have to make an exception if there's something.
Don't get that word out, Mike.
Don't get that word out, yes.
No
yeah.
exceptions.
No exceptions, yeah. Okay, so, as I said, anyone that wants to add to this list, please let me know, or delete it, as soon as possible, so we can start working on it. And I can write the articles for Mark and get them to him. Okay, the next thing is, next sheet is the estimate for the fiscal 19 tax rate, not the tax rate, the tax levy. Because what you're dealing with is the levy. The rate is actually the assessor's bailiwick because it involves the annual reval and it can change. The assessors have, even though there's a bill going out, and another one will go out in a couple of weeks, the tax rate has not been set. It's an estimated tax rate that's gone out. And the estimate, they try to come as close as possible so people won't have a big jump on their February bills. So if anything, they try to estimate a little bit on the high side. But they set the tax rate, usually they try to get it out in mid-November because they have to mail the bills by December 31st to be due February 1st. But the assessors traditionally have mailed them out early December because you do have a certain number of people that like to pay their bills before December 31st in order to take advantage of tax breaks. So some people say, isn't that nice of the town to send me a tax bill the day before Christmas? So, but there is a reason for doing it. So the tax rate this year, as I said, they haven't set it. My rough calculation is it looks like it's gonna go up somewhere between 2.5% and 3%. Now, what gets confusing there is that includes new growth, which doesn't figure into any one individual's tax bill. It's for new construction. The other confusing part is that will be subject to an annual reval, which the assessors do, and for this year, they don't have those figures out yet. So you're dealing with a fiscal year that started July 1st. The new values for the tax bills that go out in December will be based on new values that the assessors will have approved by the state before they can set the tax bill.
Reval every 5 years?
The reval, they changed it under the Governor's Municipal Reform Act from 3 years to 5 years, but they still require an annual update every year. So I don't know whether it accomplished anything or not, but we'll see.
So Mike, why do we care about that? I understand people care, no, I'm serious.
Yeah.
Because if the valuation goes up, the mill rate goes down, the tax remains the same. People get worked up when they see their valuation go up.
Yes, the reason I point that out is people think that when we revalue, the town makes money on it. That we're raising, that's a way of getting around 2.5, and it doesn't. All it does is shift the burden from one property to the other. But people have crazy conceptions about how the town is making money on the deal. Okay, so that's the 2 to 2.5%. Part of it, remember, is when a debt exclusion is paid off, that money has to be used to reduce the tax rate. Now, we haven't had much the last couple of years, and most of the debt that's come off has been from water and sewer. There is a debt sheet attached to the back of this package I gave you, so by issue, and you can take a look. That's been updated to everything that's outstanding right now. Okay, so, and I've tried to put brief explanations. Some of these, I've just said, it's too early, you know, we have no idea what's gonna happen in state aid for fiscal 19, given the state of the budget. We have no idea what warrant articles are gonna be submitted by December 1st, and what the amounts of money are gonna be requested, so some of these are guesstimates, but at least they give you a starting point to work with. The other pages in there, there's several pages that sort of are backup to this front page. They explain how we get things. For example, the calculation of the debt exclusion. The debt exclusion is all the amounts of money that have been voted as debt exclusions under Proposition 2.5. And they are added to the maximal allowable tax levy. So they allow you to raise more money than you normally would under Proposition 2.5 because the voters have voted to exclude it. And this gives you a breakdown of how that's calculated. The next page is estimated local receipts. This is money primarily, aside from the property tax levy, that the town raises on its own. And I've gotten 3 years' figures in there. A couple of things to keep in mind. You notice motor vehicle excise has been level funded. Everything I've read lately is that car sales are stalling and that they are not keeping up with the figures, the sales that they've had in past years. Excise tax falls pretty fast once you start not having a new car. So I've kept that level funded. And those are the main categories. If you look at the next page, this is,
The rental we got from, the money being made at the state hospital.
the what?
The money we got from renting out the state hospital.
That will go, last year the town voted to set up a revolving account for the hospital maintenance, and that will go into that fund. The one question, and I put a question mark on it, I'm not sure whether we still have to appropriate that money, authorize it under 53E1/2, or whether it's automatically can be spent without appropriation. That's something we have to figure out.
What's that gonna net out to, a couple $100,000?
Yeah, roughly, yeah.
So Mike, what you're saying on this page is that that rental is not reflected in these numbers?
Right, yes, it's not reflected. That, because it goes, it's like any money that we receive from school cafeteria or athletic fund or the community garden receipts. They go into dedicated funds that are voted each year by town meeting or authorized by state statute. So you don't count them in the calculation of the property tax, they're separate.
So what I'm doing, the warrant committee experience in me, that money went into that revolving fund with the idea that the money would be used to defray the operating expenses of the hospital. So
It will.
the $150,000 or $100,000 in operating expenses that showed up as an expense to cover the maintenance and security of the state hospital, normally on the operating budget, that's not gonna show up there? What I'm trying to do is balance revenue and expenses here in my head.
I don't believe it's not on this list. Last year, for the last couple of years, we've been appropriating
Right.
$100,000.
And so
that's-
that article won't even be on the list.
Well, you
No.
got it now,
Or-
23.
Is it well, yeah, okay.
As a draft, you know.
As a draft
blank.
thing, yeah, but I don't think we're gonna, well, the reason I put that there, and that's where I said I have the question mark, whether it comes from it'll come from the revolving fund. Does it have to be appropriated or can it be automatically spent? But it will not affect the tax levy, that's what you're asking. So that's $100,000 less that we have to appropriate this year out of tax levy money.
And we'll probably end up with some left over from this year's appropriation too.
Probably, well,
for operating.
yeah, so that money, that appropriation money carries forward
Yeah.
next year. So you would spend that first and then start spending from the revolving fund. Okay, and the local receipts, a couple things to point out. The local meals excise tax, that's been doing really well. We haven't got the March figure yet. So we're expecting that any day now. But it's about $35,000 a quarter we're getting just from that local meals tax. The dump stickers, by raising the price of the dump stickers to, what was it, $75? We acted as of 30th of June, we had collected $175,000 in dump stickers. Now,
And that gets distributed over 2 years.
well, yeah, but we still get a lot of laggards that haven't gotten their dump sticker yet. They're gonna start kicking them out this weekend, so. But we get a lot of money in July and August, or September, when people come back that have been away for the summer, so probably get another, 60, 75,000 next year from that.
Good.
Okay, the building permits, we've done quite well on that, but it's starting to level off. I don't think we can expect any growth there. Sewer betterment assessments, we used to get $600,000 a year for that. That's gonna disappear within about 5 years, because the sewer betterments, the sewer bond issues are gonna be paid off. The betterments are 5, 10, or 20 years, so they'll be paid off. And that money will just go down to zero. You won't have anything left for that. And that's one of the reasons the local receipts are dropped a little, because that continues to keep dropping.
But again, looking at expense versus income, the income goes away, but the bond payment also goes away?
And expense the bond also goes away. However, keep in mind that the bond is a debt exclusion. Under the state regulations, this money does not have to be excluded, as opposed to, say, school building assistance reimbursement. You have to deduct that from the amount you exempt from the property tax under a debt exclusion vote. On sewer assessments, sewer betterment assessments, you do not have to exempt that money. So we can raise the whole amount of debt for a sewer betterment bond issue. So when that disappears, yes, the expense disappears, but that has to be used to lower the tax rate. But the revenue that hasn't been used to lower the tax rate has been going to supplement the tax levy. That's gone. So we will have gone from 600,000 to zero as a loss of revenue in that category within about 5 more years.
So Mike, you've met your goal for the year for me. You've taught me yet one more thing this year that I didn't know after all the years.
There we go. There's thousands more.
I know.
Interest earnings, we did better, a little bit better. If the interest rates would go back to 10%, we'd be doing great, but we used to get $800,000 a year from that, so there's another reason why we're kind of lagging behind on that. We did have, you'll notice on this back sheet, which is Joy's breakdown of what we actually collected for last year, you'll see a figure of $180,000 as reserved interest. What that is, I said, Joy, how do we make so much interest on that? What that is, that's the money we were holding from the school building assistance reimbursement in case we had to pay arbitrage. And we've been using that since it was for school bonds. We've been using that money to help pay some of the school cost. And some of the money that we used a couple of years ago for the Wheelock boiler, we've been reimbursed now for, I think, 60% or something you get under that program. 39.5, that's all they get. I think under that program it was a little bit higher though, as I recall, But anyhow, so we're putting that money back in when it's reimbursed. And we use it for other things, like we used it for some of it for the school field this past year. So we've tried to keep it related to school capital projects, so, because it came from school bond earnings. Okay, so that's not a big growth figure, and this is the scary part, is that the local revenues are not growing. The state budget is not growing. So where does the money come from? Because the operating budgets are growing. And it's, as you'll see when we get to the end of this and go back to the tax rate, you'll see kind of a disturbing trend on the use of free cash to balance the budget. And that's what I think one of the things that the warrant committee in particular is gonna have to pay attention to this year. Especially if you want to avoid an operating override, which you managed quite successfully to do last year, so. Okay, and the last thing on this sheet is the Water and Sewer Enterprise Fund balances for fiscal 17. Again, that's the year that ended June 30th. So we're in pretty good shape on those. The unreserved fund balance for water looks better than it actually is, because I don't think we had any debt on one of those this year. But the sewer is about 1.1 million, the water is about 1.8 million. However, after you take out the reservations, it brings it down to about 1.2 million, I think. Is it down the bottom? Nope, it is 1.7. So, however, this year you'll probably have two big articles from Water and Sewer Board. One is to paint the water tower, the Mount Nebo water tower, and the estimated cost of that is somewhere around $1 million. And the other one is to continue studies on what to do with the wells, the manganese iron problem, whether they are now looking at whether to build a new well or whether to try to build a treatment plant to remove the iron and manganese. So they really haven't made up their mind. And the prices on that can vary. They're talking now up around $8 to $12 million. So that's a big chunk. I always thought manganese was good for you. We had to charge people extra for putting out their water. But it doesn't work that way, apparently. But anyhow, that is the enterprise. And the enterprise funds pay all the debt for water and sewer, which you'll see on your debt sheets. They pay all the expenses of the water department and the sewer department. And they pay other costs that are associated with the operation of the water and sewer department that are funded within the town's operating budget. For example, they pay a certain percentage of the treasurer's budget because she does the payroll and vendor warrants for them. They pay a certain portion of the town accountant's budget. They pay the pension costs and the health insurance costs for water department employees.
Who makes a decision as to what percent?
Joy. Joy has a spreadsheet, if you want to take a look at it, where she figures this all out. And then the auditors in the state check it out. And it's, where you can tell, look, if you look at in the warrant report, there's a couple of pages right after the operating budget, water enterprise fund and sewer enterprise fund. You will see the water department budget, sewer department budget, you'll see the debt for water or debt for sewer, and you'll see something called other operating expenses in the general fund. Those are the other things that she puts together that are charged to the enterprise fund. Yeah.
Mike, on a related note, while we're talking water and sewer, has the Water and Sewer Board gotten all the information that they need in order to determine what the rate will be?
They set the rates last week.
Okay, so they will go out in the October bills.
Yes, yeah, they had a
Okay.
public hearing, and they raised the water rates 4%, the sewer rates 2%.
Okay, okay.
Just on that note, Gus, I'd been in touch with them, and I think we're gonna move it from the 17th to the 7th, the discussion with the Water and Sewer Board, and that process is one of the items for
Good.
on the agenda for that meeting.
That's November 7th?
November 7th.
Yep.
And we'll cover all the water and sewer stuff, and I think the folks from the Mo and Joy and Matt should be here as well.
Yes.
They should be here anyway, because it's the budget guidance anyway, but, you know, just sort out all those issues and go through the schedule and kind of hopefully
Good.
resolve that situation.
Okay, the other thing, if you want to cure for insomnia, these are the debt schedules. The first page is excluded debt. These are the ones the voters voted to exclude under a Proposition 2.5 debt exclusion vote. And it's done by year, by issue. The second sheet, which is much shorter because we rarely do any non-excluded debt issues, is the non-excluded debt, general fund debt. The only one we have done recently was last year, when they did the high school track and field. That was not a debt exclusion vote on that, so that adds to the non-excluded debt. So when you calculate that debt exclusion, you don't figure that bond issue in there. And the last page is the water and sewer debt, and then down the bottom is a summary. And if you look down at the last two lines, where it says grand total debt and running balance, you'll see what our balance is at the end of fiscal 17, and then how much total debt we're paying off each year, and then what the running balance is after you pay that off. So, for example, June 30th, we owed 64 million. At the end of next year, we'll owe 57.8.
And in 2035, we'll owe $1.
Well, that was, the rounding error. I was here at 10:15, and I said, the hell with it, I'm not staying at you later to figure it for a buck. Okay, and the only thing, and I have a footnote down there, the only thing that the town is authorized for borrowing that is not on this sheet is the affordable housing $1 million that was authorized. The reason it's not on there, we haven't borrowed it yet. We're waiting to see how they want to use it, or if they need it, in fact.
We certainly won't be borrowing all of it this year.
Probably not, no, if you're able to keep up with your list. Okay, so that's basically it. That gives you a good start on the budget year. And I understand you people, are you people gonna meet Monday nights now at the Public Safety Building? Is that the
Yes.
plan? Good. We know where to find you then, huh? What a nice meeting room that is.
I have another question. I know Jerry McCarty was working on the capital budget.
Yes.
And I assume that's gonna drive up the amount of capital budget money that will need to be spent. Do you have any sense
It will, yeah.
of what magnitude that will be?
No, he's got it done. He told me he's just putting it, the final touches on it. He stayed home on a rainy Saturday and spent about 8 hours working on it, so he's got it.
But I think that's something that we have to have a discussion about, because I think, I know, my own personal view is that, given my past tenure on the Capital Budget Committee, is that we're not gonna be able to continue with the current process that we have of allocating a certain amount in the operating budget. I think we're gonna have to develop, once we have a longer-term plan, we're gonna have to develop an associated financing plan for that, which is not gonna be able to be done out of the operating budget, in my own personal opinion.
I think one of the other big issues that's gonna come out of that too is it a capital expense or is it an operating expense? For example, if you have a boiler replacement, or if you have a leaky roof at our town hall, is that a capital expense, or should you be budgeting for that in your operating budget? And that will have a big impact on the amount that you include for capital expenditures, so.
But I think, I mean, I've always, I've expressed this in the past, always thought that the way we've done it is a little bit backwards, in the sense that we sort of fix the amount of money and we say, well, we'll all fight over this pot, without really looking at sort of the longer term, that the total cost is and whether you're actually meeting it. So I think with this information that we're gonna have from this capital plan, we're gonna have to develop a financing plan around it, which I don't think can be done out of the operating budget, particularly given, Mike, as you've identified the additional squeezes that we're gonna have on the operating budget.
I wish the state didn't treat us like babies. when we finished the town hall, we called the state and said, can we set up a depreciation account so that when the boiler goes or the roof leaks, we'll have the money there because we've been putting it aside and investing it over the years? And they said, no. If you did, you'd be the only community in the state that does that. And I said, well, you tell us we ought to act like a business, we ought to be responsible. Then when you try to do it, you say, oh, you can't do that.
That's the very first question I asked you in my first year on the warrant committee is, what's the provisions for setting up reserve funds for things like that? And that was kind of the answer you gave me.
They've kind of done a backdoor thing under this modernization. They allow you to set up stabilization funds for virtually anything. So technically, if you wanted to set up a depreciation account and call it a town hall stabilization fund, you could probably do it that way. But it begs the point, it's not the way it should be done. It should be clear that what you're doing. And to my mind, there should be one for every building, especially these newer buildings that we're pumping all this money into, so. In my next life. The one other thing I wanted to point out to you, and I'll shut up and let you get out of here, is on this tax rate sheet here, if you go down the bottom and look at the, next to the last line, total free cash to balance the budget. And see what's happening. You know, we used to try to limit it to 500,000. Right now, the projection is $1.5 million. Last year, we ended up at $1.1 million. You know, so it's we're probably dipping into free cash a little more than we should.
That's bad business.
Yes, although I tell Joy she's a wonder. She keeps coming up with more free cash every year. I don't know how she does it, but sooner or later that's gonna run.
But
Yeah, Mike,
I think more of it's got to be used for, if you talk, you mentioned stabilization fund. I mean, it's one thing to transfer free cash into a stabilization fund or transfer it, you know, I keep harping on this, but, you know, we know we're going to have to spend money to design the new Dale Street School. And that's something we ought to be putting money aside for, so that we don't have to have a override when it's time to do that. You know, whether we can generate any of that cash from sale of property or not is a different story. But I think this is something for us to focus on, just on the schools, not to put you on the spot, Jessica, but I mean, any early, because just kind of looking through this list, trying to think about, you know, where are we going to potentially have sort of an override. You know, the only one that I see on this list that conceivably would require an override, and it's almost certainly not going to happen at this town meeting, would be the ALS EMT firefighter, depending what the resolution is from an operating standpoint. So, I mean, some of these things here conceivably could require a debt exclusion, like North Street, for example, but I kind of put that in a separate category. It doesn't affect the operating budget. Do you have any early indications on where things will be coming out from the schools?
The committee and the department's intention is, as long as we get a reasonable increase, allows us to meet our expenses. We see no reason to pursue an override, but again, it really depends on.
That's early on, yeah.
That's our early end.
Right.
We're pursuing one this year because we don't think it's necessary, as long as we're able to really meet the obligations that we have.
What's happened to enrollment this year?
We've gotten soft a little bit over the summer, you know, we got somewhere around 100 new kids over the summer. Because of graduates, it hasn't gone, the enrollment hasn't gone up that much, but it's 63 more children than we certainly expected, more bodies after graduation. So, you know, but they're spread largely over all 12 grades. The interesting thing is, unfortunately, you know, as we're kind of hitting that post-recession baby boom, we are starting to get classrooms and more kids in classrooms than we would like to Memorial right now. I think the first grade at this point is about 24 kids a classroom, and that's not optimal, especially for
Do
those younger.
you know how many kids are in the first grade and the kindergarten?
I cannot give you that right now.
Okay.
No, actually, maybe I can. It was just last night.
I mean, it's always well, recently it's impressed me that we're graduating around 225 and the incoming classes are like 160, so.
Yeah, we're going up by
Okay.
a classroom almost every year. I mean, I think.
So 192,
Yeah, it was average of 24 to 8 classrooms.
still smaller than the 12th grade.
Yes, smaller, but we have also compensated for a significantly smaller class that is now kind of pushing one classroom out. It'll happen in 5th grade, right, actually, it's the 5th grade. It's pushing one out next year, it's possible, but, you know, there'll have to be some rearranging at the middle school level. But then our populations go back up again. So, you know, it's possible we could be looking at really having to add more classrooms, but not this year.
Because I think the current senior class, when they were in Memorial, had 10.
Yeah, but the current senior class is still in the 230s, I think.
Right. I'm pretty sure that there were 10 classrooms while my kids were going up.
Yeah, so not at sort of the peak size, but sort of the
But
post-peak
it's-
size.
We will be, from what I understand Dr. Marston saying in his projections, we'll be at district size of about 3,000 in the next 5 years. We're at 26 now, just over 26, I think we're at 26.
And we'll get to 3,000 when?
In the next 5 years.
Oh.
Please don't take that as the God's honest truth, but I really.
I would happily bet the under on that one with Dr. Marsden, but just given that, you know, overall, I'm not sure where all these kids are gonna come from.
I have to wonder with all these storms down south and on the Caribbean, are we gonna start getting people moving away from those states? Coming back to the land of snow and ice?
No, because we provide federal flood insurance, they can move right back in.
Yeah.
Until we get 60 miles inland to go. That's-
Mike, can I back you up on a comment? I'm not sure if I heard your comment right. Did you assume there wouldn't be an ALS override in the April town meeting?
Well, I'm just looking at this and saying that of the things that are on this list, the only one that might require an override this year would be the ALS.
Okay, yeah, I just misheard you.
And I said, I don't know whether, it depends whether you're gonna be in a position yet
Right.
at this town meeting to say definitively this is what we're gonna do or
Yeah,
not.
I think it's fair to say we'll be working pretty hard to have a recommendation for the town to consider well in advance of the town meeting, because if we don't, then this whole problem gets
Another
probably
year.
pushed off for a year, which is probably not gonna be very,
So, that's a potential operating override, but I don't think there are any other,
okay.
nothing else that we see, Mike, right at this point that would,
No,
require a big jump.
the only thing is what Jerry comes up with on the 20-year capital plan. Because he's indicated that there are some problems, and one of them is roofs. That
But-
are gonna require some drastic attention.
but we can talk about it, but I mean, that strikes me as an exclusion issue, not a operating override issue.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, it's-
And that kind of thing he's talking about, he's projecting it. So this is like an OPEB situation, where we have been paying as we go. And if we get a 20-year projection, then we're gonna suddenly know what our real long-term financial obligations are.
Or
And then
we
we have-
haven't been paying as you go, we've been paying through, by allowing them to deteriorate. So it's catching up with us.
Well, so what I'm getting at is he gonna come in with a number for the money we have to actually spend this next fiscal year? Or is he gonna come in with a 20-year projection that says you need to be allocating X amount on an
Both.
annual
I-
basis?
I assume both, yeah, I would think, so that you can then review this and say, this is too much for 1 year, we gotta spread this out over
Okay.
5 years, or, you know,
Okay,
however.
okay.
It'll give you something to
Okay, okay.
to consider.
okay.
Mike, do we still have the 10th highest average household tax bill in the state?
We do, I thought we were dropping, we were down to.
But we were down into the 20s or something.
Yeah, we were 16th, and then we dropped down to 23rd, I think. So, but all that means is some other towns are building more expensive houses than we have, because it depends on, you know, if you got a bunch of $5 million houses like Nantucket, say, they're gonna have a higher tax bill than we do. And so, if another town is up in the $1.5 million and we're at $1 million, and our average is lower, then our tax bill is probably gonna be lower. So Haven't been dropping a huge amount, but we were dropping. I haven't checked lately, but I'll see if I can figure that one out.
Two more questions, one for you, Mike. Do they all have this? They all gonna get a copy of this?
You have a copy in the drawer downstairs. It just came in this afternoon.
Okay, and do Jeff and Mike and the school committee have it too?
I think I sent a copy to
The
Mike.
OPEB actuarial
Copies for all of us, or just one?
report.
We only got about 5, so I gave
There-
the selectmen
There's a
each one.
PDF that can get circulated to everybody.
Consultants.
The final draft,
Yeah.
yeah, the final.
I did send it to you electronically, so if you wanted to forward it to the committee members electronically, and
I haven't opened that email yet. I'll forward it.
And my second question, again, not to put Jessica on the spot, but when is your contract up?
Mine specifically?
No, well, not yours personally, the
The
teacher's
teacher's-
contract, yeah.
You know, I honestly don't know. We
Okay.
just assigned, subcommittees last month. So
Okay, so you're heading into the,
we are
next
heading into
negotiation cycle.
Season.
Okay.
And Anna Mae and Mary Ann will be doing that.
but would it hit starting in July or the following July, the new contract?
I think it's July. I think it's July.
This July, so it expires the end of June.
Yeah.
usually you do
Because this was
3
on
year.
year 2,
Yeah.
when this raise came in the before the last warrant. It was in a year 2 thing, so now.
Might connect it to this, but probably not the direction you're going. We had asked last year, the warrant committee had requested, certainly not to be on the negotiating committee, but to have a member of the warrant committee
It's not even there.
be either present at the meetings or have a constant flow of information to the warrant committee so that we know what will ultimately be inherited or passed on to our town's budget.
We should check on that too. That got beaten up badly. I think the original intent was to allow a member of the warrant committee to sit in on the actual negotiations but not speak.
But not be a negotiating member, we don't want.
Then I heard something about you can sit in on the planning sessions, but you can't sit in on negotiations.
That's
and
what I heard.
I'm not sure.
We'll iron it out with Jeff and the school committee, but,
Yeah, probably their labor attorney would be the best one to give you a cue on what you can do and what you can't do, because I'm sure the MTA teacher's attorney will have the scoop on what you can do and what you can't do, and will tell you in no uncertain terms, so. Health insurance, we did have a preliminary meeting, it was this afternoon, with our health insurance provider, and we're doing pretty well, you know, in terms of our experience. The scary part is, as they said, the trend in pharmaceutical cost is up 10%. And the trend in, what do they call it? They have some term for it, for the advanced prescriptions, you know, the $40,000 a treatment one. That's up, I think, 17%. So when you factor that in, even if we're doing well on our medical and hospital expenses, when you throw the pharmaceutical costs in there, it pushes it up. So I've estimated between pension and health insurance costs a 7% increase, and that could be on the low side, so, even with good experience. So,
People sign up for the high deductible plan?
come to the meetings. We thought we had something worked out with that, and a letter went out from the president of the teachers union saying, don't support it. So, and that killed it for this year. I always say those things, they take 2 or 3 years to, you have to get people familiar with it before they're, and they may not be comfortable with it, but at least they know what you're talking about. And I think you're gonna see, I hear, from what I heard this afternoon, a lot of the municipal and the state plans are in real trouble. They are not appropriating the money necessary to fund the systems, and they're in danger of going under. So I don't know what's gonna happen if you start having that we shall see. You know, what do they say? We condemned to live in interesting times, like I said.
Any more issues about the budgets?
The budget assumptions, I've used 3% for town and school.
Yeah.
I think I used 5% for vocational school, because one student can make a huge difference when you get a small amount of pupils. And it did take a big bump. 2 years ago, it dropped down. Last year, it took a big bump up again, so I don't know. It's not that big a figure. I've used 7% for insurance and pensions. And the rest is just guesswork, so at this point, till we know what the warrant articles are and capital budget and all that stuff. And I'm afraid it's gonna be very difficult to get figures on state aid this year, too, because it's, unless there's a change in the state receipts, but this is not unique to Massachusetts. The thing that scares me is what's happening in Connecticut and what's being proposed in Massachusetts. I read an article that the Connecticut, which is the wealthiest state in the country, has cities that are on the verge of bankruptcy. The state is, I think, $5 billion in the hole, or it's unbelievable mess. And they passed a millionaire's tax to tax the rich. I think it was, I forget what it was, some surcharge on their income. 2 or 3 years later, the 100 highest taxpayers in Connecticut, there were only 45 left. They managed to move out of state, so you not only lose the income tax, you lose the estate tax, you lose all the other, maybe sales tax if they buy their car in New Hampshire instead of Massachusetts or whatever. So sometimes I think the taxpayers shoot themselves in the foot thinking they're saving themselves money and they end up costing themselves money. And I can just see people, you say a millionaire tax, sure, I'm taxing the millionaires, let's hit them. It's okay if you hit them and you can keep the money, but if you hit them and they can evade the tax, and that's just what happened in Connecticut.
Well, they have the same issue that everybody has with is the underfunded employee benefits for public employees. I mean, they're worse than most.
Yes.
But, you know, they've all been getting kind of, just like us, have been getting more services than we're paying for.
The
by promising
legislatures have
benefits.
passed laws that are costing the cities and towns so much money so that they can get votes and please the pet public employees. And it's gonna come home to roost. And the taxpayers don't do anything about it. The same people are in the legislature passing more of the same. And, you know, who's the taxpayers gonna blame when the taxes go up? You guys. You're the ones responsible, not those wonderful people in the legislature.
Thanks, Mike. All right.
Are they sworn, the new members sworn in yet? Maybe they're getting out of here.
All right, well, thank you guys for coming.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, we have our citizen comment period. Any citizen comment? Hearing none, we go to the action items. Vote to sign October 17, 2017 warrant for special state election.
I move that we sign the October 17th, 2017 warrant for the state special election.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Yep.
Pending, Selectmen's annual calendar.
So we have at least one change, moving the water and sewer from October 17th to November 7th. And that will add December 1st as the deadline for submission of warrant articles. And leave January 2nd as final deadline for submission of town meeting warrant articles.
Mike, did you put on here opening the warrant for the special town meeting?
I think I have the special town meeting, but I didn't put a date to call it, because from what I hear, it's very much in flux, so.
Okay.
It's gotta be at least 30 days in advance, right?
I was a little, after I put down January and got slapped on the wrist for doing it, I said, well, hold off, and so it's a little more so.
Well, it's supposed to be January 8, I think.
I've heard February, I've heard March, I've heard April.
Oh, okay.
It's still January 8th, but I also thought you guys wanted to see in November what the committee was going to present before you were going to decide whether you're even going to go forward with the town meeting. That's what I understood you to say.
I can't see how they can get it done by January because you've got zoning. They has to go through the zoning board hearing process.
Probably the more important thing that came out of last week is that the committee actually has to get the approval of the Board of Selectmen of the plan. And then the Board of Selectmen and the committee actually have to work together to get this ready for the town meeting. So my concern, so I think one thing on the table is the 8th of January real? It's, part of me says it would be really good for this committee to continue to take that as a serious date, but the reason I say that is because when there is no serious date, it becomes very, very easy for the committee to just push it out 6 months at a time, which is why we're 3 years into a one-year master planning process. And so there's a need to cut that out. The bigger issue, I think, is, we talked a little bit about this last week. There's the annual town meeting, and then there's this special town meeting. If this special town meeting doesn't take place soon enough before the annual town meeting to get approval, the state approval of any zoning changes, then we lose the opportunity to actually do any early disposition of anything at the annual town meeting. I suppose alternatively, we could get to where the state hospital plan is part of the annual town meeting. And then, well, I wince too, yes, because that doesn't feel really good unless we keep everything else in that town meeting civil. But my point is, we could easily have one special town meeting, miss the gate on the April annual town meeting to get anything, any disposition, and then you're faced with the question, do we actually run yet another special town meeting strictly for the disposition of property, or do we just kind of concede another year that we don't do anything with the land, even if we finally have the master plan for what we want to get done? So we're kind of at a crux point of either pushing hard to get something done, but it's not a done deal. And I say that for several reasons. Probably the most pressing right now is trying to get the financial profile to a point that's going to be palatable or even reasonable. That's the scariest thing that showed up and I don't want to raise an alarm bell, because that was deliberately the pessimistic cost estimate that was put on the table. You know, nobody was just making optimistic guesses. They were just saying, well, what's the kind of most conservative guess of what it'd be worth? What's the most aggressive guess at what it might cost? Ugh, that's a really ugly looking number. That's where we're at. That's not the number. That's a very responsible starting point. It's a big number, so it's going to take a lot of work to whittle that thing down.
There's a balancing act somewhere between getting something done for the sake of getting it done,
Yeah.
which is what you know what I mean, and maybe the quality of what gets done takes a back seat to the fact that you're able to get it done within the
Right.
schedule. So you're
Right.
going to have to walk that line.
Yeah, no, you're right, Bill. Yeah.
I'm assuming that any zoning changes to implement the master plan will be voted on at the special as well.
That's the plan.
Yeah, because I can't see people voting on a master plan without knowing what the zoning.
Well, and I think as we've talked about it, the other piece of this in the master planning meetings is that if you get people to approve the plan, and then you come back with zoning changes that require 2/3 votes, the people who may show up for the 2/3 vote aren't necessarily the same people who really like the plan, and you've given people who don't like the plan plenty of time to marshal the forces to block the vote. So there is I think a year ago, it was almost like one meeting, you stumbled into it, and then it was like, actually, this makes a lot of sense. Get the plan approved, and if the plan is approved, then the people in the room that approved the plan should be expected to vote in favor of the zoning changes that are required to actually put that plan into effect. So I kind of liked it.
You got a long meeting.
Yeah.
That's,
Yeah,
then of course you got to get everything through the Attorney General, get all the zoning
Right.
changes through.
right. But at least that way, you get into gamesmanship where you have two different, you shuffle the cards twice and play two hands, hoping to win both times.
Yeah, I don't think it makes sense to do it twice.
Right.
You have one meeting, you get the plan approved, but I could see, I don't wanna, I could certainly see doing the special town meeting after the annual town meeting on the hospital, and then see where it goes and the disposition of it. And, I would think that, even if you had to do a second special town meeting in the fall for the disposition, it would be worth it to move it along in that way. I don't think having it at the annual makes a whole lot of sense for the main discussion of it.
So, yeah, so but having lived this for a couple of years, my concern is, we're not in development. We're just in master planning. And so the longer we stretch this master planning phase out, the farther out we're pushing the development. So we may get forced into that. I would hate to concede that here in September,
I agree.
that we're gonna actually have the disposition meeting in maybe next September.
No, look, I think our plan should be what we're planning, which is we're gonna have a special town meeting before the annual town meeting this year, whether it's in January or February or March. That's when it will be. But again, given the process, we haven't seen a final plan yet, and we don't know what that's gonna be, and we've got to discuss it with the committee and decide, whatever, when they finally land and say, here's what it is this something that we're gonna support or not?
Right.
Or does it need to be changed? Do we need to adjust it? Do we need to, whatever else has to be done with it?
I would say that a big driver of that, which is not gonna be anybody's specific fault, is gonna be trying to whittle that financial nut down to something that actually looks reasonable. That's either gonna happen, or there's gonna be a much more fundamental rethink that has to go into the plan.
Or find a way to spread the financing or whatever, spread the impact.
You can't hide, well, yeah, as long as, but I would count that as a master plan that basically has looked and said, here's what we want to do. We actually conceptually can see how if you manage it the right way, the town isn't going to get sucked into a major investment just to simply make sure that developers make profits on what they build. It's got to be, that to me is time phasing. It's important if there's even any way to configure it in a way that'll get you in a good spot. Yeah.
So in terms of our guidance to the State Hospital Master Planning Committee, Mike, thanks for circulating another draft of the document. That looked fine to me.
Did to me as well. Mike, I'll give you, as soon as I find where I put it, I had some pure wordsmithing issues. I just have to find my copy of one of these is written on. It's not that one. Hold on, give me a second.
I had a missing letter.
Happens to me all the time. I set it up and then I move them. It's not that one. It's this one, I think. And I'm just gonna give this to you, Mike. But let me, the minor wordsmithing, first bullet, it's, I would have said reference to a comparable master plan. The way it's written right now, it says, what you'll provide is a comparable master plan. So it was, I'm just gonna give you this, Mike, so.
You'll give me your markup? Okay.
Yeah, I'll give you the markup, but it's that kind of editorial stuff. On the third page, in that paragraph, what it says is, in the run-up to the special town meeting, the Master Planning Committee has already recognized that it would be advisable for the committee to define and implement a vetting process with the public, key stakeholders, and other industry experts, such as executives from leading real estate development companies, above and beyond the public participation required by regulations for the passage of zoning changes. Given the requirement for the Board of Selectmen to approve the proposed master plan before the special town meeting, it might make sense to focus on the presentation to the board first. I don't think that's what you meant to say. We need to make clear that those preparatory things are things that they should do. Of all the approvals, they have to come to the Board of Selectmen first. But I don't think you were saying those things at the beginning of that paragraph are all things that should come after.
No.
Right.
But maybe we need to wordsmith it a little bit. I just think from the standpoint of, for us to give it a meaningful review, and I think the guidance is the first steps to sort of set expectations so that the committee's not surprised. But if you've sort of had a whole public vetting process and the announcement is this is the plan, right? And this is the plan, this is the plan, this is the plan, and then you come to the board here for
Yeah.
approval, there could have been a lot of work done by the committee, that if we decide that we're not gonna support the plan, it sort of goes out the window. That's my only
So
concern.
here is my concern, so I was looking at it an opposite way, particularly having to do with bringing in professional real estate developers to look at the practical aspects of the plan. This has, if we did it that way, we would approve the plan, and then then the committee could very easily talk to some master developers who say, this whole plan is screwed up, you've got it structured wrong.
Right.
I was saying they should talk to the master developers first to make sure the plan is realistic, and then come into us with the plan plus some degree of confidence that it's a plan that can be carried out.
So I think I was focused on the first part of that, and that's a long sentence, so I will make that sentence shorter.
Okay.
I agree with you. I was thinking more in terms of the public process. Like if they're
Okay,
gonna run
got it.
another public
Yeah.
sort of info session at the high school, kind of, there's a lot of work that goes into that, to have those kind of things. And it would seem that we gotta do that after kind of we're all on the same page. But I agree with you in
Yeah,
terms of the
yeah,
expert
yeah.
input, we should get that before.
Yeah.
So I can break
So I've
that
got that
sentence
written
up.
down.
It's a 4-line sentence anyway, I can break
Yep.
that up into shorter sentences.
Your third bullet below that, you just had a question, additional implementation items, and
Just if either of you had any other implementation stuff.
if you want it, you can add, I just said additional master planning activities if needed based on results of the special town meeting.
Okay.
So, if you want to put that in there.
Okay.
And then the last thing is, on the last page, you kept I had an asterisk footnote. And the point of the note was, there may be multiple things that the town has to vote on to fully approve, especially around zoning is what I'm thinking of, to fully approve this master concept. It's possible that the town would not approve all of them. It's possible that of the things they didn't approve, they wouldn't be fatal flaws in the core plan. So the whole point of the footnote was just to say, as long as they don't disapprove one of the most fundamental changes that just drives a stake through the heart of the plan, that doesn't mean you can't move ahead with the plan. But the asterisk went away. So either the footnote should go away or the asterisk should show up somewhere again, so.
Take it out.
So that was it, and you can pass that down to Mike.
The only other question kind of related to this, kind of going, but we can take it up later as we get closer to the special town meeting, so we'll talk about that. So.
Do you have a schedule for release of this guidance?
Soon.
I mean, do you agree with Gus's comments, Pete?
For the November meeting?
Basically, yeah.
I think it's really important to get it to them sooner rather than later. It's probably not realistic. I plan to attend the meeting tomorrow night, so it's probably not realistic for you to turn it around, just to give it to them. But I'm happy to just say, take whatever there's there, finalize it, and just move with it. You know, if you've got what you got there, mine were editorial changes, just finalize it and send it to them.
Yeah, get it out,
Yeah,
get it
that's-
out to them.
All right,
Right.
so
That's fine with me. If
you want to
do.
vote to approve this as amended with
Yeah.
Gus's comments?
Let's have a
and-
motion on that then.
Yeah,
I-
and then that way, I can try to get to it
Right.
tonight when I get home.
Okay.
And send it back to everybody and,
Don't meet again until next month, I mean, after tomorrow.
Right,
night. So
right.
at least they can work on it, they
Right.
can always send it out for review among
Right.
themselves.
Right.
okay. So I would move then that we approve the draft guidance document circulated at this meeting with Gus's editorial comments, and I'll send a final out to everybody on the board tonight. And then Gus, you can transmit it if you'll be at the hospital meeting tomorrow.
I would amend that as interpreted by, my comments as interpreted by Mike.
Uh-oh.
So your version is final.
Always dangerous, but yes, okay.
Right.
Does Pete have veto power over it?
You know, this has to get out, and we've got the important stuff. As amended, I second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Yep. All right, good. And then next thing is the continued discussion of the Veteran Service Officer. And,
We got an update from Christine today, right?
yeah,
Yeah,
So then-
Christine
Westwood doesn't want to work with us,
sent an
apparently.
email. Yeah, they feel that they have so light a caseload that they can't justify.
Yep.
And also, there's the question.
pay? They already have a VSO. I don't understand the logic. We want a full-time VSO, we'll pay half-time for it, is it that are they also another town that doesn't really pay their VSO much?
I think what some of the towns do is they appoint like a
Volunteer.
deputy fire chief or fire lieutenant that is a veteran, as veterans agent, but they have someone in town hall do the work. You know, process the bills and that, but, again, it was a case where there was such a light caseload
Yeah.
that they felt they didn't want to, and then there was, we tried to get Dover to, form a district with us, and they preferred to spend their $1,000 on another town where they pay the veterans agent $1,000 and say he's their veterans agent.
Right.
And they have no cases, so. But they were afraid if they joined a district, that would be the first step into hell. You know, that the budget would go up and they'd be assessed higher amounts, and, you know, I think that's, it's a common fear, particularly, I think any community that's part of a regional school district tends to shy away from regional solutions because they've been burned, so. Or they feel they've been burned.
So Mike, you and Chris are gonna go forward with advertising for part-time and
Interviewing the people that we have responded, so we have, I think, 3 applicants right now, so we'll.
there were 4
interview them
applicants.
and, yeah.
The 2 that weren't suitable.
I think the 4th one, I don't think we ever got an application on the 4th, maybe, but.
Oh, all right, that was
Yeah.
maybe why I never saw the 4th
Was there, is
application.
there any further discussion with Roberta about how to coordinate that with her?
We have, yeah. The problem is finding, whoever you find is gonna be a veteran,
Right.
so.
So, but Pete mentioned the BC program that specializes in that.
That who?
Boston College has a social work program that has a veterans component to it.
They do, okay. Well,
And
we
so
can
they-
check with them too, so, see if they might have, but the problem is, we're funded for $27,000.
Well, no, that's not a problem if we don't have a problem with Roberta. So this was probably one of the most humorous
Yeah,
conversations I've had yet as a selectman, was the
If you
one we
combine
had
it, yeah.
around a 1.5 FTE, broken out into 3 halves, broken in it. Alex, so if Roberta is okay with one actual body covering the half-time VSO job and half-time of the social worker job, and is allowed to keep, from a budget and a hiring authority standpoint, the ability to hire another half-time social worker. And if we go to BC and we find a social worker trained veteran of this program that Pete's talking about that wants to come here, that feels like, I mean, you're still gonna open it up and let people apply, but if you define the job, assuming we can find somebody like that, and that sounds like a program that's designed for exactly what we want, as long as Roberta is willing to break that social worker position into 2 different people.
She's been away for quite a bit of the summer, but we'll get together with her.
So she wasn't at Chris's office at 8:45 in the morning as Chris figured she'd be. Roberta, if you're watching out there.
She's not.
It's not broadcast live anyway, guys, so we're good.
Not
Well, she
Frank.
goes down to YouTube and finds it. Right. Right, but I mean, that would seem to me, I mean, if you found a veteran who, given the overlap too, between some of the work the council agent that does and the veteran service officer does, who would be a full-time VSO, a full-time salary, but would also provide services to the council agent, that to me is the ideal solution.
Right, and Mike, to your $27,000 number around salary, is that if we had to make an adjustment, I'm sure we wouldn't adjust down, but if we had to make an adjustment against the other half of the social worker, that, I'm guessing, is something that would be open for discussion, so that piece of it's not the problem.
I mean, you'd essentially be flipping it, right? Right now you have a full-time council on aging position.
Right.
And a part-time VSO position. You have a full-time VSO position that spends half their time with the council on aging and then half-time council on aging.
Right.
Right, and that's what you'd end up with, and Roberta would still have
Right.
the equivalent of one full-time employee. And depending on the workload, she might get more than
She
half
might
of the
be in a
VSO's
much
time.
better
Yeah,
spot,
actually,
yeah.
Right, I mean, she might really have 75% of the
Yeah.
VSO's time and a half-time social worker. And,
Right.
I mean, Ron, I don't know.
That sounds good to me, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, just,
It's all possible because, you know, what I keep saying is the requirement for veteran services keeps going down every year.
Hmm.
So, you know, looking ahead.
Right.
I do see that the requirement is lower, which makes this whole situation more difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Makes this decision more difficult, but, the number of veterans out there is dropping, dropping statewide, nationwide.
But if BC has a program that's geared toward veterans to set them up as social workers, that sounds almost like ideal for the kind of a there may be more than one way to do it, but that's one ideal way to get it done.
And apparently, as we've looked into this, we are not the only community facing this situation. There are a number of communities that are
Just none of them are contiguous with us.
technically in violation, I guess you would call us.
Yep.
And some of them have, you know, 0 or 1 caseload.
Mhm.
Now,
Right.
granted, I know there's a lot of other things that the veterans agent is responsible for in addition to the Chapter 115 programs, but,
Well, this would be a way we could comply
Yeah.
as long as we actually have somebody who'll go along with it here.
if by fortuitous chance we can find a accommodation veteran social worker, then that
Mhm.
would be the way to go.
Yeah.
I'll send you the contact information for the BC people again.
Okay.
You know, it may, you know, there's probably somebody out there, but you do have to put the word out
Mhm.
to find out, you know, what's out there.
but now at least you'd have a full-time position description for what it is, right?
If we source it in this direction, I mean, that was, I think, the dilemma all along was when you put the position out and you say, well, half of it is this, and the other half is either we do 5 positions, we only want 1 person, and there's 5 variations on the theme on the other half, or the other half is left open and nobody knows whether they fit or not. So that's what I like about what you're talking about, Pete, is there's you know that if BC has a program to do that, they're focusing on veterans and they're trying to set them up in a social work career. So which in a way is probably a better way to get it, is a veteran who comes in and from what you've talked about the position, at least Ron, a veteran who comes into this with an interest in that kind of a career is probably going to improve your chances to get a good veterans agent who cares about veterans and also can be providing a meaningful contribution beyond that, so.
Anything more about VSO? Continued discussion of town goals.
So I only had a brief point about the goals. The 2 things, Pete, you sent out these or you had Christine send out these goals that
Yeah.
were from like a year ago.
Yeah, we both sent them.
I didn't try to do anything, and I put this on the agenda just because I think this is a discussion that we should keep going until we get it to where we
Right.
think we like it. So I had 2 thoughts on this. One of them is when I went through these goals here, at first I went through and said, well, we're not trying to build up a laundry list of every department. I got to the pavement management system under highways. And at first they said, we're not trying to do an inventory of every town department's goals. And so at first I just said, I don't know if this is going to work. And then I walked away from it and I came back and said, well, if there are certain goals that are of particular interest to the selectmen, so it's not that we want all the goals of every department on this document, whatever form it takes, but if there are certain goals, like I could see the pavement management system and the progress on that as being something that's of particular interest to the Board of Selectmen, then I could see kind of selectively pulling certain goals out from the departments and putting, whatever ultimate form what this takes, putting that on the list that says, here's the watch items that the selectmen have a particular interest in, and they'll map onto the 5 areas, but I could see doing that. So that was one thought I had. The other one I had was, and I don't know whether, maybe it's good enough just the way it is, or if we take the short term away just because we don't want to get people spun up, but I think we have general agreement about the 5 areas, the qualitative descriptions of those areas, and I think probably we even have pretty much comfort with those long-term goals that you added that kind of start to quantify this. We might have to tighten up the numbers. It occurred to me that it might be worth putting this out to the town and just say, this is a draft, these are the town goals that the selectmen have created, and what we'd like to do is it's a draft, we'd like to have you take a look. This is what we think we should be emphasizing in this town on a long-term basis. We'd appreciate your feedback.
That's a good idea.
And so we don't worry about getting this to final form right now. We just worry about getting it out into a form that it can be published. It's just an open discussion.
Well, and I would think of it as an evergreen document, too. That
Oh,
we
yeah,
would just keep
yeah.
constantly changing it.
Yeah.
I think as long as you tie it into the financial aspect, to me, that was one of the problems with the whole hospital questionnaire that went out. They asked, what would you like to see up there? And they didn't ask the second half of the
Well,
equation
yeah.
of what are you willing to
But if we
pay
had,
in
if we had the,
taxes to
if
pay
we had the
for it.
long-term goals, Mike, that's kind of, I mean,
They're part
this
of the
isn't a
goals.
financial drill entirely. It's, in fact, it's not even mainly a financial drill. It's really,
Yeah.
what is the town value?
But I'm not sure a lot of people associate that. If you say, what do you think of these goals? They're immediately gonna look at building a new school or fixing bridges or, building a park and rec facility without necessarily looking at what will it do to the tax, how's it gonna be paid for and what will it do to my tax bill?
I mean, some of the goals we have in there that are financial related.
Yeah.
They are, but how do you tie those to the realization of the average citizen that they are related?
Well, I mean, I think that's partially our job, right, to sort of synthesize it, to say, because I mean, it seems to me kind of comparing the two lists, so we've got, because one of the things I think with the short term and the long term gives us kind of markers. Here's the thing, is looking out 5 years ahead, here's what we're looking to accomplish. The short term helps set priorities for the departments, because we can't just kind of every meeting or every so often come up with a list of stuff we want to do.
Right.
And expect that it gets done, right? I mean, part of the goal-setting process, I think, is that we accumulate potential things we can do. And we sit down in the short-term area and we put it in the calendar, okay, every year, maybe we do it at the end of the year, right? In June, we're gonna set the goals for the next year, starting whenever it is. And we say, here are the 4 things we want to get accomplished in the next year, right? We realistically, we're talking to Mike, talking to Mo, what can we realistically get done? And, here are the emergency items this has to get done in the year, and then here's are the ones that could come next year, and then sort of set those priorities. Because the problem with sort of just kind of having a list without it being tied to some time period is that not all of it can get done, right? I mean, we don't want to have a government that's so big that we can do all of these things, right? We want to have it small enough that you're gonna actually have to prioritize some of this stuff. And so I kind of see the short-term piece of it as kind of an annual prioritization effort, right? And so, and I think eventually, for example, when the website gets redone, something like the to-do list should be on the website, right? You should be able to go to the DPW website and see, here's 36 things we're gonna do and estimated time to do it, right? Here's, so if people have a question, when something's gonna be done, they can, instead of emailing one of us, they can just go to the website and say, okay, this is the current date of completion is this particular date, right, for that project or whatever else it is. So that's kind of how I see the short-term goals interacting, the to-do list / short-term goals interacting with the long-term goals. That it allows us annually to prioritize and then to say, and so it's clear, this is not something we're gonna really work on this year, whatever it is, right? A particular sidewalk or a road, or this is something for next year, right? This year we're focused on this, and we're gonna push that to next year. And so the answer's kind of clear to everybody. We know, okay, this is not happening in this year, it's gonna happen next year.
So you're working the short-term side, I was still working the long-term side. And part of it is, I mean, for all I know, nobody's gonna comment at all. Maybe nobody's, maybe it's too conceptual, it's too broad, and it's why I kinda like the long-term goals you put in here, because I actually think that's a place where people could start to grasp things. But Mike, to your point, not the short term, not what we're gonna do next year, but let me give you an example of the kind conversations that have gone on. There's a lot of people in town that want sidewalks. And, yeah, we can talk about whether or not there's a sidewalk that's gonna go on North Street this next year, but we ought to also be able to have a conversation that says, you know, everybody in town wants sidewalks, but sidewalks across the board are really expensive. And we, you know, we don't think people really want to pay the kind of taxes that would require to give everybody sidewalks now. So having that more, you know, it's a more strategic discussion, and it involves actually the selectmen sometimes telling people that want stuff, no, you know, we don't think it makes sense to get you what you've wanted exactly as you've wanted it. And the reason is because it's going to have a negative impact on these other areas and the goals. So I'm actually trying to take care of the strategic side of this first. And then if people are reasonably comfortable with the strategic side, then now we're getting into tactics and, you know, the year-to-year stuff. You can have debates over whether it's North Street or Green Street or that kind of stuff. But at this stage, this early stage, I was only trying to hit the long-term broad picture. And half of it was to get feedback, and half of it was to let the town know that we're thinking like this. Because I think the town's been critical about whether the selectmen have thought like this or not. I think there's a lot of people in town that haven't seen it.
Yeah, no, I think putting out the long-term goals for comment and input, I think it's a good idea. I mean, I think the specific kind of what do we want kind of piece, everyone can want something. I agree with you on that, Mike. But I think in terms of like putting here's what we see as the long-term goals for the town, and whether we define long-term as 10 years or 15 years, whatever it is, this is what we're aiming at. And we're going to measure sort of what we're doing year to year by these kind of long-term objectives.
Yeah, I just don't want us to become like the federal government where you never hear anybody talk about how they're gonna pay for anything. All they talk about is what they're gonna do for you.
I don't think you gotta worry about that much. Not for the foreseeable future.
There are ways communities have got themselves in that pickle.
Yeah, I don't think you gotta worry about that for the
I hope
next
not, yeah.
foreseeable future, Mike. I will I'm the instigator on this whole thing if you want. What I'll do for our next meeting is I'll actually do a version of this. I'll take a look at the long-term goals if there's any places that I think the numbers, if there's holes, I don't care. But I'll reformat this to just be the long-term stuff. We may still want to keep working out this version because it's still got the short-term stuff here. But I'll try to format this in a way that might lend itself to having Christine put it out on the web. You know, Pete, you might want to put it out on your blog, and once you do that, then it gets picked up in the Concerned Citizen, so we get it out to people. Just ask them for feedback.
Yep.
At least we'll find out whether anybody cares. Okay.
And I think that we should be working on our to-do list as well.
Yeah.
The short-term stuff. I mean, the pavement management plan ended up on that list because of the fact that at the time that it was put on the list, the person who was running the DPW wasn't interested in that type of planning. And so it was an attempt to try to
That was where,
institute.
that's where I broke down a little bit when I was trying to, I was originally gonna try to do something with that, and then when I looked at that list, it's like, should I put the pavement management plan on or not? And at first I said no, because it's highway department, and then I said, well, yeah, actually, that one might, that is something where, you know, it's still gotta be completed this year, so maybe that one does make it, because it's an item of interest to us, so.
Yep.
Okay,
Like the new website.
okay.
Do we have a motion then for our license and permits?
I would move that we approve the licenses and permits as set forth on the consent agenda.
Let me ask one question. The very first one, the Stony Brook Road Block Party Permit Request. Says a rain date is October 14th. I did not see that in the request. I don't think they gave a rate. They said there was no rain date in the request. Don't ask me why I paid so much attention to that one particular thing. I was reading it and I saw, I think what caught my eye was it said September 23rd was the date and October 14th was the rain date. And I had, just as I saw that, I had just read in the request, we don't have a rain date. So I think that's an error.
Yeah, one of them, that's right, didn't have a rain date, but
So you wanna vote it without a rain date? I'm not sure.
Well, they didn't ask for one, so yeah, I think that has to be dropped unless you found out more after you sent it. So so the rain date goes away, we wouldn't approve that for the very first one, Stony Brook Road. And then the other question I had was on the oh yeah, it's still here, this Katie Walsh Capsule Lifestyle, I didn't see, was there no written request on that, or I didn't see it? Or is it there? Is it in there now? It didn't get distributed, okay. Is it in there now?
Is there a license holder there?
Gray folder.
And we got one request that came in late, but we did add it from the high school student council requesting permission to hold their sleep out for the homeless Wednesday night, tomorrow night.
It's Capsule Lifestyle, okay. Great, okay.
They may need a rain date.
Yeah, they need a rain date for sure. They're gonna get deluged.
And I would move that we approve the licenses and permit on the consent agenda, except with no rain date for the Stony Brook Road block party.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Yep. And then the next thing is the town administrator update.
Okay. The storm forecast looks like we're not gonna get as much rain on this storm as they originally predicted. I think the latest figures I've seen are 1 to 2 inches, so just certainly we could actually use, because we're kind of in a drought condition again, so. I think the one we have to watch out for is Maria, because they are not sure which direction that's taken, but it appears to be headed westward unless it takes a track out on the ocean. That's a possibility, and that looks like another really bad one. Hopefully the cold water would, if it got up this way at all, would drop it down, but I think we have to keep an eye out for that.
Mike, do you go through procedures with your DPW to make plans for a big storm event like that?
Yeah, and we get updates from MEMA, and we get updates from Eversource, and from Comcast and Verizon with what telephone numbers
Yeah.
to
But the
call.
DPW goes around with culverts and things and checks on that sort of
Yeah,
stuff. don't
yeah,
they?
I talked to Bobby and Mo, and
Yep.
they have procedures for cleaning out culverts and raising dam boards and whatnot that they go through. It's a tricky act, because if it doesn't come, you don't want to have raised the dam boards and let the water out, because, you know, it's nice to have the water, it's a good resource. But on the other hand, if you wait too long and it does come, you're in trouble.
Someone recently asked me about beavers at Stop River under the Causeway Street Bridge.
Beavers are a problem everywhere.
Has that been taken care of at the bridge?
They're constantly taking care of it. One of the problems right now, I did talk to Barry Mandel a couple of weeks ago, and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts does not let us trap until, I think it's either November 1st or December 1st. So right now, you cannot trap for beavers unless you get an emergency declaration from the local Board of Health. For 10 days, they can only give 2 of those, and if you go beyond 2, it has to be approved by the state Department of Public Health, which is stupid. I mean, what do they know about beavers in Medfield?
2 beavers, 2 traps, or 2 beaver ponds?
2 10-day
2 10-day.
2
permit,
10-day open
emergency
season
permits, yes. Well, and then you can't use leg hole traps, and you can't discharge a gun within 500 feet of a house, or I think 250 feet of a road. It's crazy. I said, what I'd like to do is take a couple of beavers, bring them into Boston, put them around the State House grounds, and see how they like it. So, then they change their opinion pretty fast, so. Okay, but yeah, we do keep an update on that, and, but it's gonna be an issue until the season begins, and the other thing is, there are fewer and fewer people who trap in Massachusetts now. It's a dying art, so,
The pelts are apparently worth virtually nothing.
pelts are worth nothing. Barry told me the last person that would accept beaver pelts stopped taking them. So there's no one left in
Oh, so they're worth
Massachusetts that
nothing
will take, because
at
they're
all.
worth nothing, yeah. Yeah. Somehow we have to encourage college kids to go back to beaver skin caps and beaver coats and whatnot, so yes.
So
Maybe
we'll all
we,
start
maybe,
wearing those to push this.
yes, Evelyn, maybe we can get the Wall Street Journal to feature that for the next issue. They
Board
have
of
some,
Selectmen in beaver caps.
yes, they put out some incredible clothes. I wonder who would ever be caught dead in them. Anyhow, next week you might, next meeting, Park and Rec is coming in and DPW is coming in, so you might want to brush up on the issues you'd like to talk to them about. I think the whole concept of what they're thinking is on buildings, what they're coming in for is they have completed the study, the needs assessment study that they've done, and they want to come in and get your support, probably for a building.
Can you ask them to send us the study ahead of time so we can take a look at it before the meeting?
Yeah, could you call and ask them if they'd get, email that or whatever, get it out to the selectmen, so. And I think they were bringing the person that did the study to the meeting with them, that was my understanding.
Great.
You also, I don't know what other issues that are coming up. I think probably the issue of cooperation with the schools, how that's working out, and with the King Street Club and any other sporting groups in town, if there are any issues with soccer or whatever. Similarly with DPW, you've got, Mo is gonna give you an update on progress he's been making on the pavement management plan. And he'll also give you an update on the Phillip Street Bridge. He has been trying to get some contact work going on the West Street and 109 Bridge, the Bridge Street 109 bridges, but that's down the road quite a bit. And then probably you'll want to discuss North Street with him.
Yep.
He told me somebody told him that the North Street project was on the state's Department of Transportation list for 1950 or something, I think it was. So
The year or
the year, yes, yeah. So
since
I think we might
1950?
want to come up with an alternate plan. One, yes. One of the things that we talked about was if the state isn't funding it, we can do it to our standards. We don't have to do it to the state standards, so you can do it quite a bit less expensively.
The last discussion we had with Mo, I think it sounded to us like the state wasn't likely to do that, and I think, Mike, you had suggested that we probably have to take a look at biting the bullet on that one and
Yeah.
doing it. Yeah.
Well, one of the things I discussed with Mo that I think you maybe ought to give some consideration to is doing it in phases. And if you scale it back to the town standards, you can still put in the brick sidewalks with the brick trim like we did across the street. You can still do granite curbings and the handicapped access and everything, but maybe start at Dale Street and go down to Green Street, then do Green to Frary. And then in the meantime, try to work with Representative Garlick and Representative Julie to see if they can secure any funding for the replacement of the culvert, and maybe get some cost estimates on what it's gonna cost to replace that culvert. Apparently, there's a lot of stuff that goes over and under it, gas lines, sewer lines, you know.
It was the culvert and the sidewalks that were the expensive parts.
Yeah, although the sidewalks, you know, I don't know if you've seen the sidewalk they did down in Metacomet, came out terrific. And they did that with the highway crews. And I think if we could do it in segments like that, use some of our Chapter 90 money, maybe use some of the sidewalk repair money and do it in phases, I think it might work. There are some other issues you have to look at. Now, Owen told me that a couple of years ago that the fiber optic line has seen better days and probably should be replaced at some point, and that goes right up North Street. It goes to the public
The
safety
town-
building.
The town's fiber optic
town's,
line?
Yeah, yeah, the Comcast wanted us off. They were looking to get more broadband, so they paid us enough money to put our own dedicated fiber optic line in. And we did that, but then,
How long ago was it, Mike?
oh, probably about 10 years ago. And it runs from the, I think the junior high or the high school, I think maybe at the time it was the high school, whatever. But, and then it runs up to up South Street to Main Street, up North Street to the Public Safety Building and over to the Dale Street School where they have file servers. And I think it runs to the town garage. It does not run to the senior center. Senior center is fed through Copwood Road when they did that, and that's through Verizon. So they tied in that way because it was a remote site at the time. So those are issues that I think, and anything else you might think of, but it's probably would be good to throw some ideas at him and drop him an email or something so he can be prepared on some of these issues if you, same with Park and Rec. Memo, another very successful day. I think they exceeded their ticket sales for other years. The weather turned out
It seemed like a
fantastic.
great crowd. It was packed.
Yes, yeah. And the food was good. Of course, there's an election today, so there was a lot of political activity around. But I really want to commend Memo and particularly Russ Hallisey and then the crew that he puts together that with all the volunteers that they have. They do a great job.
It's always amazing to me every year is how quickly it's cleaned up.
I know, that
You're
is
there at 5
amazing,
o'clock in the
yeah.
afternoon, it seems like nothing happened.
Yeah, the
Well,
DPW
it's
does a
that
great job.
It's that great work crew they had, right, Pete?
It's the DPW that cleans it up.
I was there too, you know.
Oh, I saw Mike at the end of the day. Yeah, Mike was loading a truck. Although I don't know what you were
I
loading into that
tell you,
truck,
I don't know
Mike.
what they're gonna do when Hank Marcel doesn't do it anymore, because he's the real key to that whole operation, I think, so, he and Russ, so. but-
I hadn't been there in a few years. Once the kids got older, we kind of stopped going, and
Yeah.
I had not recognized how much bigger it had gotten from what my recollection of it was.
Yes, yes.
It's impressive.
There was only one huge disappointment this year. The Legion didn't have sausage with pepper and onions.
Oh, is that right? I never got down that far. Oh,
Yeah, they didn't have it this year.
Man.
I don't know what happened, but.
oh.
Okay, we have had another request to meet with Kelly, on the Dale Street project. They're now talking about a 42 unit on the town garage side
Oh.
with all townhouse type construction. So I think it's 10 or 10:30 on October 5th, if any of you are interested. If more than one of you are going, let us know, because it'll have to be posted. Otherwise, it doesn't need to be posted if only one of you
Yeah.
goes.
Since you were there before, Mike, do you want to go again?
Sure.
I'll get you the exact time, so it'll be here, so. And if there's anybody else from your committee that you think would be useful, that might be interested in attending.
Mike, is the MRA group at all involved in this discussion?
The what?
The Medfield Responsible Affordable, it was the old opposed Medfield Meadows that morphed into a group that basically said they wanted.
I think one of those has been attending your meetings, hasn't he,
Brent Nelson? Brent Nelson is,
Nelson,
yeah,
yeah.
there's a couple, yeah.
Yeah, no, we didn't, not at the first meeting, it was just Mike, Christine, Sarah, and I with Mr. Kelly. I think we'll have to talk about who comes to this one. We had talked about with him that when it's time to go public with it, that we thought the first step would be to have them come to an Affordable Housing Trust Board meeting. Would sort of be the logical first step for kind of a public meeting presentation of what he's proposing.
Well, the reason I'm asking, and obviously you gotta be thoughtful about what you do here, but I went to the reception that they had after they'd succeeded at blocking the project. And the thing I was impressed with is that as a group, they basically, and I'm I don't know whether it's everybody in the group, I don't know whether every single member of the group that opposed the project has the same civic commitment that the people that were leading the group had. But they basically, I take them at their word, they basically said, after we won this victory, we sat down and said, so are we done? And they basically said, no, we'd like to continue on as a group that's basically working to help the town figure out how to responsibly go about developing its affordable housing. So they didn't want to be appointed to something. What I'm getting, but I think a good number of the citizens, the membership of that group probably are from that area. It would be, if that's the project is getting into that kind of a ballpark, and it's being thoughtful about what would make sense here, if it's possible to get the leaders, the people that have that commitment to acting responsibly with regard to it, if you knew you were going into that project, not with the opposition of the people who care, but actually with the endorsement of the people who care, that could be huge. You gotta
yeah.
think, you
Yeah.
gotta be thoughtful about how to do it.
And Mr. Kelly can do that if he gets the numbers down to the right level. I
Or-
don't think
yeah,
that 42 is it
yeah.
yet, but
Yeah, well, maybe, that may be true, but what I'm getting at is, if it's a group that feels like they've been, maybe they're not, I'm asking the question, I'm not, if that group felt like it was in an appropriate way being brought into that conversation, in whatever way isn't gonna get everything going off the rails in all directions, but if they were actually able to have some participation in these early discussions, not necessarily directly with the developer even, but just that there's an input when the time comes for whatever that project looks like, if we could get that project to be one that the people that are gonna probably most directly affected say, these guys actually adjusted. They actually finally listened and they made the adjustments and now we're okay with it. That would just make it a whole lot better for the developers, for us, for, the whole town and everything.
Coming off the last meeting I had, it's sort of on my to-do list to talk to that group about. I wanted to see what he came back with after the first
Yeah,
discussion we
yeah,
had.
yeah.
So now we're gonna have a second meeting. So it's been my intention to get
Okay.
them, to talk to them, outside of a meeting.
Right.
Just to keep them updated on what's going on.
Right.
Before, depending if he decides to come in with
Yeah.
a meeting at the Affordable Housing Trust, then that will sort of be the.
I asked them the question as to what sort of numbers would be acceptable to them after the last go-around, and they do have numbers in mind, so it would be good to get those to Mr. Kelly.
Who from the trust is assigned to that group?
We haven't assigned someone yet.
You haven't?
We haven't assigned someone yet. I mean, we talked about it at our last meeting, and we've not assigned someone to deal with Mr. Kelly. But our next meeting is October 3rd, and so if someone wants to be assigned to that, I'll have them come on the 5th as well.
Okay.
So, but otherwise, everyone's covering something else, but I think there's a couple of people who should have some time based on the status of the projects to which they're already assigned.
Okay, that's about it. They did finish repairs to the town hall roof and put a gutter over the back door and the rear, so that should help quite a bit. We had to replace the door, it rusted out from the rainwater falling on it. So, and the gazebo roof has been replaced, so.
Great.
We have a lot done this summer, the Anaconda sidewalk got done.
I was appreciating Route 109 when I came here tonight.
I know, that came out really nicely. It's really remarkable how well it came
Yeah.
out and how quickly it went.
It's
Gotten
great.
a lot of positive feedback too at the speed and the way it was done, the way it was handled.
Yeah, yeah.
It was kind of very well
I
done.
think we had one complaint, right, Evelyn? You had one, so.
Yeah, and then she found me.
They'd have to do
You
with
had to
sleep.
put it together. I even talked to some of the owners of the restaurants, and they didn't have a problem with the way it went, so. It really is a credit to the highway department. I remember it was the same thing when we did the railroad crossing, that police and the highway worked with MBTA and did that over a weekend. And went fine. So, I think poor Medway is taking the rap from us, though, because, you know, their project, which is entirely different from ours, and much more complicated, but people are comparing that to ours.
Lengthier. Well, good. We
We're
look
looking
good by
pretty good,
comparison.
even if we shouldn't.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there are times when we'll get criticized, and so we might as well take the
Yeah.
kudos. Selectmen's report, Mr. Marcucci.
I was just gonna comment on Medfield Day and how well that went, and I was gonna comment on the 109 as well, so. Other than that, I don't think I had anything else to report on.
Mr. Murby.
A couple quick ones. We had another ALS study team meeting, and we had the newly appointed Sherborne Fire Chief come, who is a Medfield resident. I was very impressed with him. He was very thoughtful, and he actually, I'll let the committee work through the options here, but it looks like there's potential for collaboration with Sherborne, and the nature of that collaboration could potentially give us a less financially painful option that until last week wasn't even on my radar screen, at least. We're making, it's a complex issue, we're making some good progress, and we're getting some good information that's actually opening up new possibilities. But this guy was very thoughtful, and I'm sure we'll enjoy working with him, if it comes to that.
I met him on Medfield Day. Chief Meany pointed, both he and our interim fire chief out to me, and I met both of them. But the Sherburne fire chief was very well-spoken.
Yep, a lot of experience, has been down in Tennessee, kind of has pursued this kind of thing his entire life, he said. He's always had an interest in it. It's a different fire department than ours. I think it's just him and the deputy chief are the only ones in the firehouse on a full-time basis, but,
Yeah, he told me he was the only full-time person.
yeah, maybe the deputy chief isn't even full-time.
It wasn't that long ago when that was the case here. So,
Right.
Yeah.
When we added the 8 men.
Yeah.
Before that, it was just Joe, and Freddie used to be there as a volunteer.
Yep.
So, but-
Second item, that OPEB, I just literally got the final when you sent it out today, Mike, so two things. Number one, I would like to have an OPEB Trust Committee meeting for us to talk about that after everybody's had a chance to look at it.
Yeah.
I'll follow up with Georgia on that. For the two of you in particular, if you take the time to read this, one of the reasons I want to have that meeting is I would actually like to find a way for us to kind of briefly capture the history of the town's effort to fund OPEB, so that, but to do it in a way that not only, everybody could understand it, including if we just put it out to the public, they could kind of get it. The one thing I would talk about here around this obligation is the way that they calculate it is screwy, in the sense that if you are fully funded and you're completely up to speed, they calculate your required payment on a 30-year horizon going forward, and they give you an assumed return on your investment that's like 7%. So if you're in great shape, what you have left is a small number based on a 30-year calculation period and a good assumed rate of return. If you fall short, what they do is they stuck a stake in the ground when this first came up 5 or 6 years ago, and they don't change it. So the calculations for what we have as by way of a required contribution are based on, I think, a 24 or 22-year time frame, and it assumes something like a 4.5% rate of return. So what's frustrating about that is, so you're trying to decide how you're going to impose the pain to do what you're supposed to do, at the same time that the calculation that they use is being manipulated based on where you are in the game. And that makes it very hard to actually be, to really figure out what's financially feasible and responsible when the calculation approach is different for the two different situations. And we're in one that's getting better, but we're not in an optimum situation that we're doing everything we're supposed to be doing.
It's interesting, because you'd think that the professional group that is setting the standards for how it has to be done would assume a sort of a very fair approach.
Well, I mean,
logical.
historically, they've always way overestimated the returns, right? So one of the ways that most governments have been able to vastly underfund their long-term obligations is by pretending they were gonna get a much higher rate of return, right? Connecticut obviously is in really terrible shape. Illinois is in really terrible shape. I mean, Massachusetts is not, nobody's in great shape. I mean, nobody did this well. Nobody did it responsibly. But with a few exceptions. But even 7.5%, maybe not. I mean, it's, you know, when the Harvard endowment, you know, just came back over the last year, and the market is, I mean, if you were in an S&P index fund, you're up 20%, and they were up 8%, right? So I mean, it's, you know, it's a semi-fake number. I mean, they're sort of basing it on experience, but it's an experience that's driven by, you know, what's now looking more and more like an unusual period of economic history and not a typical period of economic history. And so, you know, kind of my reaction to reading this is that the first step is to figure out, and this is one of the reasons I asked Jessica about the contracts, is as we start to look at these, to close the gap for current employees, right? In other words, we have a historic gap that we didn't fund, but then we also have the kind of ongoing gap that and I gotta read this in more detail, that we're bringing up still with unfunded promises. And that, to me, is something that we've got to figure out, how do we close that? And where do we close that gap? So that the legacy deficit is one thing, but the new deficit is another.
So the other stick of dynamite that the Government Accounting Standards Board threw into this is that up till now, you had the town, Mike, if I get this wrong, please update it, correct me, but up till now, you had an annual required contribution. If you didn't make that full contribution, the shortfall went as a liability on your town's books. But it went, so basically over a 30-year period, whatever your shortfall ultimately turned out to be, it would be incremented up by whatever shortfall you had in each year's annual retired contribution. GASB, I don't know, last year or 2 years ago, suddenly decided they'd change the standard. And they basically chose that you have to carry the full unfunded liability on your books starting next year, Mike?
It depends on the size of the community, but I think it is next year.
So what's happened
in our
is the
range.
states and the communities, virtually all of them, some are in worse shape than others, but virtually all of them, and the weakest cities in the state are in the worst shape financially. But instead of kind of working the pain in 1 year at a time based on the annual shortfall, GASB just changed the rules 6 years into the game and said, no, I think we're just going to dump this entire liability. Well, those liabilities are big enough that you're going to get to municipalities that have negative net worth. So what does that do to being able to finance anything? And so it's kind of like this can of gasoline. They threw a match at it. And when it happens, I don't, you know, it's something's going to break, but I'm not sure exactly what it'll be. And we're in relatively better shape.
Yeah, I think they had to, because communities and the state legislators were ignoring their responsibilities. They were not appropriating sufficient monies, but they were increasing the benefits they were awarding or forcing communities to award. So in a way, it's probably a good thing, because sometimes you have to light a fire under people to.
Well, this is a big,
make
yeah,
them-
so my point, though, is I don't know if you get to the point where you literally pull the borrowing authority out from under the, you know, the rug out from under a municipality where they're just dead in the water, especially if they're one that's financially troubled. I don't know, you know, does everybody go bankrupt and then we reset everything, or, you know, that's gonna be a big problem.
It may have to come to that. The legislatures are so fiscally irresponsible, and the federal government is worse than anybody, that they are allowing these unfunded liabilities. You know, you talked about we can't behave like the federal government. Yes, we can, by not funding our long-term obligations like pension and health insurance. You can get away with it for a number of years because you're hiding those liabilities. What this is forcing communities to do is recognize those liabilities. So when they go out to borrow money, they'll say, how can you borrow money? You're $50 million in the hole. That may be a good thing that they're doing that. It's going to get worse, because now they're looking at doing the same thing with unfunded pension liabilities, requiring that you record the whole thing at once. Now, the last figure I saw for Medfield was $18 million was our share of Norfolk County retirement unfunded. So you got 40 what, 2 million for OPEB and 18 million for Norfolk County. And if you throw the mass teachers in on top of that, which the state covers, but they're on, the annual pay-as-you-go cost on that is something, a few years ago, was something like $6 million just for Medfield. So you can imagine when you get into these cities where they cover 75% of the health or 90% of the health insurance for retirees, what their unfunded liabilities is, it's gonna wipe out cities and towns, and they're gonna have to start all over again. But it's gonna force the legislators to do something about this crisis that they can keep putting off by deferring liabilities and not appropriating money.
So now, Mike, now that you've been on the video and have totally scared all the people that actually watch this video, that's part of why the OPEB committee will put something out that basically tells people what we're doing here
Yes.
to try to address that issue.
By the way, somewhere buried in this, and I sat around and read it one night, and I can't exactly find it, but I think it said we were around 3.7% funded.
Yeah.
And we have $2.6 million roughly. So that's 3.7% of our unfunded liability, according to this actuarial study.
Okay.
Which is pretty abysmal, but they tell us we're one of the most progressive communities in terms of our funding level.
Right.
So can you imagine what the others are?
Right. Okay, I didn't want to go too far off. It's just that when you read it, I did want to draw your attention to the game that gets played around calculations. Just a quick check with you guys. I think I heard you two can make that library centennial on the 1st.
Yes.
I'm going to be out of town that weekend. I may get back in time to be there late in the afternoon, but if you can cover that, then I can be out of town. Okay, okay. And the last point, this is hoping I'm not violating any free enterprise restrictions on selectmen, but if you haven't been following, I just wanted to point out that we have a recent, now college grad, but just a very recent high school grad, Matt Treist, here in town. That's one of I guess, the newest store owner in the new building, retail building up on North Street, the company Be Charmed. And the only reason I'm not bringing it up, I am. I'm bringing it out to say, hey, there's a new store with a guy who just just graduated from college. But I'm I'm really bringing it up because we've got a young adult here in town that was 5 years out of high school, who's come back to town, opened up a business, and I gather this is, from what I read, it's not even his first business. He has another one, or had another one out in the Cape. So it's kind of nice to see somebody coming back in, and I hope he's successful.
Keith Kerbo did that a year or two ago
yeah.
up by Donut Express with his yoga and music
Right.
studio.
It ain't Medfield anymore.
So I don't know if that's a shameless plug, but it's a plug. That's
He
all
was
I
telling
had.
me they
That's all I
thought
had.
somebody from Medfield got picked to be on, what's one of those shows, American Idol, or Can You
there was
Sing or Dance or
Yeah.
something, so, whatever that's worth.
Oh. I had two things. I went to the Dwight Derby House Gala, 20 years that they have been running that for the town. The town rents the Dwight Derby House to the Friends of the Dwight Derby House for $1 a year. And they basically did all the renovations and fixed it up and did some fundraising and also got some grant money to do that. And they're still looking to do grant money. They're looking to to have a real kitchen in there finally. Really wonderful event, wonderful music. It was Jerry Bergonzi and Tom Dupree, and just really professional musicians playing for you, and good food. And the other thing was the Medfield Foundation had a meeting this past week, and just mentioned that they're going to have the Angel Run on December 3, beginning at 2:30. And that's it. Anything else, Mike?
No, I think that's about it.
Okay,
I move that we adjourn.
excellent.
Second.
Time for dinner.
Thank you, Sam.
You're watching Medfield TV, community shows.